Hello everybody, Volen here in Pursuit of Art. What we're going to talk about this week is we're going to cover our first component of making an image look realistic. If you've missed the last video, it's where I give you the whole entire big picture process of what does it take to make something look realistic. This week we're going to dive in and we're going to go over the first concept, which is accuracy. And specifically, we're going to go over what I call location, which pretty much just means getting everything in the right place. That's literally all that there is to it for this first step. It's easily probably one of the most important ones because it establishes your whole entire picture for the entire time that you'll be spending later on. You could maybe spend, let's say, an hour to define where everything is supposed to go, all the critical points or all the big elements, where they're going to be and how they're going to relate to each other. That could take an hour, let's say. But then you're going to spend another 10, 15, 20 hours to just render everything over the top of it. Render meaning to just apply the surfaces. What are they going to be? What are the materials? How does light interact with them, etc. But if they're in the wrong place, especially if that's important, a key factor here is that sometimes you have some leeway. It really depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a landscape, you don't need to be as accurate as you need to be when you're doing a portrait. A portrait would have a likeness that's easily lost, and it's very hard to actually get it to read correctly. You need to have the spacing of all the features mapped out perfectly. If you're doing a landscape though, no one's gonna care if the mountain doesn't have a likeness. It's not something that people are so familiar with that they're gonna know that there's like a snow patch that I think you missed, or it's a bit over to the left. That's not something that's possible. So it really depends on what it is you're doing, and you can take some liberties and go fast in some areas and slow down in others. It's up to you pretty much to assess what it is you're doing and how important it is. Let's have a look at what that actually looks like. So with an image like this, accuracy, the location of where everything goes, would be pretty important because we're trying to get it to read, to look very much like the reference, as close as possible to it. That's really the goal of the exercise. If it was just, let's say, if you decided that you just wanted to train in values or train your colors, it wouldn't really matter very much if your shapes are off. In fact, you can see in like this block-in that I have over here, I don't really have any transitions between the edges, etc. All that I've been trying to do at this point is either figure out how to layer things, or I've just been looking for something, not particularly for the likeness. I wasn't trying to get it to look correct, or I wasn't trying to get it to look like the reference. I was just experimenting, trying things out. So it really depends on what it is that you're trying to do. A lot of people try to get everything correct all the time. And then when you get poor results, you feel really bad about yourself and you're pretty hard on yourself. That's not necessary. It really just depends on what it is you're doing. If you're only practicing accuracy, then it's not even necessary that you render this thing afterwards. All that you could just keep doing over and over, just trying to find all the points, the location of everything, etc. Without getting carried away though, let's just have a quick talk about when is it important to get things in the right place, specifically being more aware of when can you actually move some points around that it doesn't really matter. Points, elements, shapes, whatever it is that you're actually working with at the moment. Let's say, for instance, in this sketch right here that we have, this line drawing, this is what I would refer to as getting everything in the right place. I'm trying to create the map that over top of I'll be rendering. So this is going to be the unseen part that a lot of people try to really gloss over, go through it fast, again, because no one can ever see it and they're not going to be aware that it's there. So most people just want to get to the part where they're putting in the final touches, like where they're actually doing the form. They're trying to do the things that other people could see. They're trying to get to the good stuff, in other words. This is probably the most important part though, just getting everything to be, ensuring that you're able to work with your materials over top of this to make sure that you're going to get a good final result. Now again, depending on what it is you're doing, this doesn't necessarily need to be this elaborate. I would say that this is probably, I would say that this is kind of sort of what you need to aim for. Maybe about 30-40%, 60-70, depending on, again, how complex and how important it is that you get everything in the right place. This example here would be overdone. but this is done for training purposes. When I was recording this yesterday for a demo for you guys, I just wanted to just go through the process and just do the whole thing. If I were actually painting, this would probably be a bit too much. I have way too many shapes. If I just overlay these together, I have way too many shapes that are probably gonna constrain me when I'm actually doing my rendering over top of everything. For instance, minor inaccuracies like over here where I'm actually not complete, this shape is not entirely correct. I might, because I have the illusion of this drawing, that it seems like a paint by numbers thing where this is supposed to go here, this is supposed to go there. So the line drawing could in fact stiffen me up and make me less aware of mistakes that I might have made. So you might actually see painters sometimes, if they're doing a portrait or if they're very experienced and have been doing this for a very long time, they might just start with a couple of strokes. Like for instance, instead of having a line drawing that's this elaborate, and again, this is only just done for practice purposes. So I'm not necessarily using this to paint. I just want to practice getting things in the right place, which is how you develop the accuracy necessary to need less elaborate drawings. So then you can actually work with less and get more done. So you might see someone that may just make a mark, let's say for the nose. So let's say that they just kind of have something that might be incomprehensible even. Like they might just make a couple of marks. And to them this means nose, bridge of nose, top of forehead. Over here it might be just the bottom of the jaw. And they might just make a couple points. It might be an internal point like here, like this could be this point over here. So they might just go off of something like this, or maybe not even, it might not even look like that. It might just be like some tone, like they might just put over here loosely, they might just put this shape in, and to them, this means the bridge of the nose. So they've made a note of where this is supposed to go. And then they might pick the next color, and then they might go like this. So it really depends on what you're doing. There's no rules to any of this stuff. But if you're a beginner, it's a good idea to follow procedure. And this is what I'm trying to give you. If you're a beginner, if you're struggling to get this stuff to look right and you don't know what to do and you're sort of desperately trying to figure out why is it that your images aren't working, I'm trying to give you a procedure that if you follow it, you will take a longer time to get there, meaning that you will inevitably take a longer time than a professional or someone that's a lot more experienced. That's just part of the game. I mean, they've been doing it for 10 plus years, let's say, and you've been doing it for 10 plus hours. So it's part of the game that it's going to take longer for you, and you need to go through the more slower, elaborate process of working every piece, working more on it than someone that's more experienced might, because they just have pretty much what experience translates to is they have more connections in their brain for all that stuff. So they've like built mental muscles of accuracy, let's say, of picking the right values, picking the right colors, and being able to work with them very efficiently and very fast. Whereas you're building those now. So this is part of your training, and that's why I call it practice. Is when you're doing accuracy practice, for instance, you're not necessarily looking to have a finished painting at the end. You're looking to improve your accuracy. And learning to work with separate elements like that, just seeing them as practice, as a workout, and just doing that is going to be probably the fastest way for you to improve. Let's have a look at another example. So this is an example where your initial line drawing, at least, doesn't necessarily need to be as accurate as the one that we looked at just now. So for instance here, this is probably the ideal line drawing. Maybe you might even go with a few less, but this is probably, it's got all the major elements in there. But it doesn't necessarily have any of those other micro details that might just stiffen you up and make you not able to judge your shapes better. This requires a more elaborate plan, a more elaborate map, because there's so many different shapes and angles, etc., that are gonna basically hinge on whether you get a likeness or not. So unless you get the spacing, let's say, between the eyes and the nose and the mouth, the width of the mouth, unless you get all those shapes correctly, you will most likely not get a likeness. And you can see over here when I've been doing this study, I've tried it a couple of different times at that point, and you can see that there are minor differences, but they do translate into this head, which looks like it's been a bit squished, like someone just stepped on it or something from the side. You can see that I've kind of lost the likeness, especially because of the width of the mouth. That's definitely different. The nose is actually a bit squished. That could be a result of the line drawing being a bit too rigid at the time when I've been doing this. Forehead is also smaller. So these things are easy to notice when you're at an early stage, which is again why the location exercise is so important. It's easy to change stuff when it's this simple. When it's this simple, all I have to do is, let's say I notice that a shape may be a bit too small, I just move a point. I grab this point, I move it over. Grab this point, I move it over. That's all I have to do to make an alteration. If I'm at this stage, then what I have to do is I have to change the tone, cut into this side, cut into that side. It's not that it's a lot at the moment. But if you had a study like this, then easily if I'd made a mistake somewhere, let's say over here or somewhere in the face, if I had to move the eye right now, that would obliterate all the tones around it. So the more complex that your study gets, or if I decided I have to move something on the hand, I have all these tones that I've painted in that I'm now gonna have to move over, repaint, and it's gonna take me something that might have taken me 10 seconds to fix, might now take me 10 minutes or sometimes 10 hours, although that's probably gonna be something not very likely to happen unless there's like a nuclear bomb that you need to repaint or something. You can see over here, this is the initial line drawing, and it's done very, very loosely. Why that is because at this stage, I'm not really trying to get all the points, like all the fine points, like I'm not trying to find where's this guy's eye gonna go. At this moment, I'm only just trying to find what are all those big building blocks and where would they go. So I'm trying to just, let's say, find where is this line over here, how far is my building gonna extend? Where exactly is the figure situated in this study? How big are the dogs, let's say? And you can see that something like the stones over here on the floor, they're not as important. I could easily change a shape, and you can see here the initial drawing, that's pretty different to what it actually ends up looking like. With the drawing, it could evolve as you paint. So again, the more experience you get, the less you rely on having to have 100% precise information. You could start with very little and then change things as you go. But having at least a rough understanding of where all the main components are gonna be is really helpful. So if I started this painting with absolutely nothing, I could have ended up painting the figure over here or maybe extended the building too far over. So just spending, let's say, 10-20 minutes to just put the main components in there. Where is this dog gonna be? Where are they all located? Where is this guy going? If I just spend 10 minutes doing that, then I have a good basis for the next, let's say, half hour to 1 hour of laying in tone and value and color, putting those in, seeing how the actual drawing that I have at the moment might be different to what I need, then changing it and just evolving it and refining it as I go. So you can see actually if I overlay this over the final painting, you can see that I was off on quite a few things. So the figure is actually lower than I'd initially painted it. But the actual procedure to how I would do this is I would just have a simple line drawing, put in then accurate color and values, which are going to be the next step. This is going to be the next video that we're going to talk about. And then I refine the initial step first. So it's a constant back and forth. I don't need to get everything perfect. I don't need a perfect line drawing, again, because that might stiffen up the whole process. I would need it as a plan, as a map of just trying to figure out where everything would go. So it could be initially very rough, just trying to get in that block in of where is everything going to be. Then when I put in the tone and the color, I might see, well, this seems a bit too high. It's because when you actually put in the color and the value, you might be better at seeing accurately when things are in the actual value or color that they're supposed to be in. Having a line drawing is sometimes a bit too abstract, so you look at it and you're not quite sure if it's making sense, if it's too small, if it's too big. But when you put in the tones side by side, chances are, if you weren't able to see it in line only, when you put them in actual color or value, you will get a new perspective on them. And also another thing that you can see that I've done here is I've flipped the image as I've been working. And this is something that people do quite often, is they will flip the image horizontally. So then you get, again, a new perspective on what you're doing, and you can notice discrepancies more easily. So not only am I using color and value also to just put things in place, look at it again, refine my line drawing, keep building tone, keep building color. So this line drawing here, for instance, that's gone through quite a few evolutions. So you can see over here when I've put in the actual tone and blocked it in, I've then gone over and done a new line drawing of all the important features of the figure. So I wouldn't do this for everything. I wouldn't have to necessarily refine the stones or the straw or the background over here, but the figure, since it's important, it's very important to the image, it's the focal point, I would have to get everything in the right location. And again, we're back to where we started at. Everything, if you need a likeness, if it's important to you that your image is realistic and that you portray something as it looks in the real world, then you need to have a certain degree of accuracy. With some things, again, you could be looser. No one would know if I move the line over here or if a tone isn't in place. But if I go over to the figure, if I change something on the face, that would be very easily noticeable and I would distort the likeness. Now I'm going to play you a quick demo of what the actual process may look like to get all the points in the right place. What would the actual building of a map? I don't want to call it a line drawing because that's not necessarily what it is. I don't need to have everything be detailed. It's not about the line is going to disappear completely. So all that this is just building a map of where my tones and shapes going to go. So I've left on screen, I've actually left Camtasia open. I recorded the webcam so you can actually see me measuring stuff. And I'm going to do this quite often, especially in the beginning stages. The more details that I get, the less and less I'm going to have to do that. But at the beginning, I need to check and double check and triple check all my different points. So if I just pause quickly, you're going to see, you can actually rewind this and go over it a couple of times if you wanted to. But you can see what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to locate. All you have to start with is just one point really. All you need, you could just do, let's say again, there's no rules to this stuff. So you could start with, let's say, a simple block in and then just try and figure out is everything in the right place. My method of working at the moment, because I have a reference that I could easily check, is that I'm actually trying to find one point. So let's say this point. I could measure from the top of the canvas, I could measure from the side of it, or I could just arbitrarily decide it kind of sort of looks like it might be here. Once I've done that though, once I've arbitrarily decided, let's say, or precisely defined it, then I'm going to have to find all the other points and how they relate to it. So the first point, let's say, is for free. I could just put it anywhere. And then afterwards, I need to build everything to be in the correct relationship to it. How far is this point from this point? What's the angle that it's at? So you might see me measuring things at an angle. I'm holding my stylus up to the screen. So I'm even holding it now. I'm not even sure if you'd be able to see it or not, trying to show you guys. But what you get to do from now on is you have to figure out those angles, and there's ways to check those and double check those. And what I tried to do in the video, and again you could just play the demo over a couple times, I'm trying to show you with red lines over top of here what I'm looking at and what I found. Like for instance, there's a relationship between this corner and this corner. They're pretty much vertical. As I'm measuring things, as I'm looking around, I'm finding more and more of those relationships and trying to use that to double check and triple check my points. You just saw that here. So I just saw there's a relationship between this one and this point, and I'm just trying to, holding my stylus, you can see me again, is I'm holding it vertically and then just offsetting it slightly to the left to see the angle of that point. And then I'm trying to get it correctly. And I'm trying to find all kinds of relationships. For instance, over here, there's a perfect horizontal pretty much between the two corners of the jaws. So as soon as I find one point, I can then find the other point. Then I also check the relationship between, I found that this is a vertical, then I'm checking the relationship between those two, and I find that this one is actually offset to the right. So you can see over here, this point is a bit moved over. So this is really the process. It's nothing magical, it's just slowly building, checking and verifying. I'm thinking of something, is this looking correct? Is this where it's supposed to go? How can I double check it? What other point can I find? And this is called triangulating. You're not just looking at stuff vertically or horizontally, you're also trying to find relationships that are at an angle so that you could check this point by checking this point or against this one or this one or this one, or even like the corner of the jaw. You're referencing it to many other points to make sure that it's as correct as possible. And right now it looks like a little smiley face with a chubby nose. I should have left it at that, I think. So this is the process. I'm going to speed it up a bit more. And going forward, you can see I'm adjusting things as I go. Sometimes I find that as I've put something, it's a bit too small. So then I enlarge it, I move it, I nudge it. And again, this is way too elaborate probably for a painting. I would have left that at about 60% of what it is so that I can, when I'm doing the next pass of accuracy over it, so this is the first one, this is location. The next step of the actual painting process would be to put in correct value or color shapes in there. So when you're doing that second pass of actually putting in those shapes, you get a free double checking pretty much of what you've been doing. So you don't need to be super obsessed about getting this 100%, which is how I used to work before. I used to need to have everything in the right place because I felt that if I don't, then the final is gonna suck. So I would have to get everything correctly, and it makes for a very rigid and stiff painting ultimately. So what I try and do now is just not be that attached to the line drawing, just put in a couple of points that are going to give me a good idea of where I'm supposed to take this thing to. And then afterwards, as I go along and put in the right shapes and the right color, I'm still checking for accuracy. Like I'm double checking yet again, is this correct? Does it look right? Should I change something? Should I move it over, etc.? But I try to do it in the more simpler stages of the painting. So not when everything is in place and it's rendered with all the bounce light and everything else just looking as perfect as possible. That would be a bad time to make changes. The earlier, the better. Remembering to flip your canvas, that's gonna help you as well. Just always finding a fresh eye for your painting. And again, this is practice. So if your accuracy is off, which mine isn't great even now, but I don't really do that type of work too much. I mostly try to do 3D drawing type stuff. But if your accuracy is off, then this is the type of practice that you need to do. Just grabbing a couple of Asaro heads, just using photos really. So if you just go online, go on Google, type in Asaro head, or just anything that you find that's blocky and mechanical, cubes, etc. They're great to just develop accuracy. So you can just practice on those. The more mechanical points that you can find, the easier it becomes. Because when you get into organic shapes that have a lot of curves and not really use faceted lines, then you're gonna be in more trouble. And a tip on that is that when you have curves, you don't actually try and draw the curve, you simplify it to a faceted line. So you go with straight lines always, and you try and then build the curves by just adding in more and more tones to just curve instead of have faceted transitions. So almost at the end now, and again, I'm just really doing accuracy practice. And now just noodling around and refining and just getting rid of those final little points. And it's pretty close to the final. Here we go, that's the end of it. So it's pretty close to the final. It's something that you could use, but again, not necessarily the way to go with such an elaborate drawing. And I'm gonna just quickly show you now how I used to practice all this stuff when I was trying to build my accuracy, because it really, really sucked, and I identified that as one of the key things that I need to work on, is that I could never get anything to look like the thing that it's supposed to be because it's just so inaccurate. I would just have so much trouble with all this stuff. So you can see these took me quite a while too, so that's 50 minutes. So I spent as long as it took. This is probably another 40-50 minutes. So I would just do these daily. I would do a couple, like 2, 3, 4 a day, let's say, as many as I could. So some days less. But I would do as many as it took to just sort of get better and get faster. So I would pick different angles, ones that are harder, and just try and locate those points. Yet again, like how is this point, let's say, related to this point? What's the angle between them? How far are they spaced, etc., etc. And again, 68 minutes, 65 minutes. That took me a long time. The one that you just saw the demo of, that was about 25 minutes. So half the time and more detail in there than most of these. Lots of, a big thing for most people, me definitely, is enlarging stuff. So you can see that this head is actually quite a bit bigger than this one. I think we try and overemphasize what it is that we see, so then we make it a bit bigger. And you can see that I've done quite a few of these, so there's loads of those, and probably more that I've done and just haven't saved. But this is how you go about practicing this stuff. Final thing that I'm going to show you is why all that stuff is important. When I talk about points and how they're spaced and why that is important, and why tone is also important. What do all these things mean? I want to make an impression on you guys that everything that you're doing has meaning. So every single tone that you put down, every single point that you put somewhere, that has meaning to the final image. Your tones, your values, your points, how you locate things, how you space things around, that's your vocabulary. That's your essentials of what it is that you're trying to say. So your values, let's say, for instance, describe a surface. Where you locate different points, where the transitions for those values are, also speak volumes about the surfaces that you're rendering. So if we have a look at this head, this is pretty much what the location concept refers to. Everything in this 3D program is defined by these little points. So you can see over here, if I select everything, you can see that there's all these points defining this geometry. That's why I talk about geometry and points a lot, is because I use 3D concepts because I find them to be very useful. 3D render stuff realistically, real world objects very realistically. So it's reliable, and the way that it works, if you work the way that it works, if it could produce realistic results reliably, then if you duplicate that method of working, then you can also do realistic stuff reliably. So everything is defined by these points. And in the study that we saw, in our line drawing study, getting these points in the correct place would pretty much mean whether our study is going to have a likeness to the original. So these are all the points, and how they relate to each other is how the final image looks ultimately when it's lit and when it's rendered, when values or colors are applied. And you can see now why it's important to get things in the right place is because if I grab a single point, let's say here on the side of the muzzle, if I grab this point and I move it over, so let's say that you get your study slightly wrong and you move a point over, what does that mean? Like, what does that actually do? You can see here to the rendered image in the final, it doesn't really change very much. But if I have a look at what's actually happening to the face now, you can see that this guy's mouth, he's now got this thing coming out of his face. Like his mouth has got this huge corner now going forwards. That's probably not something that you want to happen to your guy. And you see, the more I move that corner point over, the more and more severe that becomes. Like, this guy's got a real condition now. I need to send him to the dentist or somewhere. And you can see, if you look on the left here, this is how it's going to look when it's lit and rendered. So you can see it's very little differences between, this is his natural position is over here, and this is the really, really distorted position. You can see it's a slight change, a slight lightening of value. But that's why all this stuff is important, is because those little changes, if accumulated, let's say that I move this point over and then this point, let's say I move as well and I distort it slightly, all those changes accumulated are going to work to change your final likeness. They're going to change your image. So that's why it's important that you get these as close as possible to what you see in the reference. It's because they have meaning and because they distort or change the form. The more of those micro changes that you have, the more people are likely to sort of be distracted about what seems a bit off, what's just not right, especially if it's a portrait. Again, the more people are going to be distracted at just looking at what seems a bit off rather than just looking at the work. So that's why these points have meaning, and that's why I define them as points, is because to me it makes sense. Like, it's the edge of geometry, it's the edge of an object, it's how it relates to everything else in the scene. So a quick recap of what we talked about today. And I'm trying as best I can to simplify as much as possible and not really go on and on and on about stuff that may be obvious, but sometimes just repeating something enough times gives someone the final, like, so that's how it is. Just slightly twisting something, given to you in a different context, changing it over and over, but really just saying the same thing in a different way slightly, sometimes is all it takes for someone to just finally get it and it finally clicks into place. So I'm trying to not go on for too long, but I'm also trying to give you info on how this stuff works. Please send me comments and let me know about what may, need some further explaining for you guys, what it is that you're getting and what it is that's still, kind of lost for you. Send me some feedback. Let me know what you think. Send me some questions. They always help because they let me understand how you guys think about this stuff. Quick recap. What we talked about today is we covered the first component of accuracy, which is just location. It's getting everything in the right place in the first place. Before you start rendering, before you start applying any value or color, is at least having an idea of where everything is going to go. It doesn't necessarily need to be an elaborate line drawing. That's not really necessary, especially because it's not going to be part of the final artwork. What it needs to be is it needs to be enough for you to work with. That could be just a few lines or a few strokes, but if you're consistently having problems with getting things to read accurately, then you may need some more. So really push it as far as you can until you decide that that's a bit too much. If you can't really figure out how to go about something, give yourself a bit more help. Keep giving yourself a bit more help until you find, okay, this is reliably what I need, and when I get the end result, I can pretty much consistently know that this is going to be okay. So just try it out a few times. Have an elaborate one and have a less elaborate one. See how you go about it. See how it works. Practice accuracy sometimes. Don't necessarily go for a final finished painting or something with applied rendering, meaning that you don't necessarily need to paint this thing. You don't need to shade it. Just practice getting the points spaced one from the other. Or if it's a landscape or like a bigger scene with more objects, just practice blocking in simply where is everything gonna go. You don't need to, if you have like a squirrel in the background, you don't necessarily need to define where is the squirrel's eye gonna go if it's like 2,000 miles away and it's on a mountain somewhere and you know that it's there because you imagined it, but no one can actually see it. So don't obsess over stuff that's actually not important. Even with something like this study, there's areas that are important. Like for instance, I would want to get kind of this area to be correct. But then over here, no one's going to care if the base is a bit smaller or a bit bigger, which in this case, it's probably both. This is a bit smaller, this is a bit bigger. That's not important though. Nothing really happens over here. It's not really important that I get it right. It's more important that I get the nose shape, the mouth shape. All of these critical points are going to be a lot more important. So again, there's no rules. All of these things are just a way to get your work done. They're tools. As Vilpu says, there are no rules, just tools. So everything is really fluid and you go as you need it. So you'll inevitably develop a way that only you work in, meaning that you develop a very specific way you go about stuff because you understand your process, your limitations, your strength, and you build on those. There's not like a factory line of how is this stuff done, how is it correctly done, etc. It's what works, and that's what matters. So today we talked about location, getting stuff in the right place, having that underlying map. Next time, these three really, these over here, they sort of go together. So next time, I'm probably going to make a couple of videos. One just showing you guys how to identify value and another how to identify color. People struggle with those quite a bit. And then they actually work together because you're drawing shapes now with your accurate value or color. You're putting the correct shapes with the correct value / color. So we're going to cover that in the next couple of weeks. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Please give me a like or subscribe if this has been useful to you. It really helps the channel. Send me your questions, your comments, your feedback, anything that you want to share. I would love to see it, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much.